Well, hello there, welcome back to my channel. Today is Sunday, October the 4th, 2020. I'm working on a piece here that I would like to share with you, and I want to go through some stages as I bring this to a finish. I'm going to work on the street today and mix in the colors for the street, but feel free to click on the subscribe button and watch this video to the end. So I'm looking forward to seeing you when we come right back. Stay tuned. Well, welcome back. Now, I am working on my painting here that I started a few months ago. It was inspired as an en plein air sketch in the parish of St. Peter during the regathering activities in February. And I had gotten it to a particular stage where I had everything blocked in, all the local hues and colors, as you can see here. I even added some figures for interest, and I want to encourage you young artists out there who are working on your pieces. It's always good to add figures and animals and things of that nature, if you will, to your piece. And can you guess why? Well, it adds life to the piece. It brings a sense of vibrancy, and persons in the whole have certain characteristics and mannerisms about them that are unique, that maybe you can see a particular gesture or gait of the person that you can identify. And you can always have fun in your piece when you look into a painting and say, wait, the artist captured me in that piece. So it's always good to have that kind of addition to your works, I must say. So in terms of this, we would have seen that I have pretty much my sky blocked in over here, my foliage, and we'll discuss this as we go on in the videos in the next coming weeks. And I have my local color of my tree established here with some raw umber and burnt sienna. I was looking to highlight some values on that as well, in mid-tones and lighter tones. And as I said, I had my figures in terms of composition arranged in a kind of circular motion here. But I want more specifically to work on the street today. You can see I have it generally blocked in, but I want to also show you how you can mix your limited palette colors to have a sense of getting a gray and varying forms of gray, because I like to add colors to my pieces. So you can also look at, I'm working in oils, in the medium of oil, so you can look at using white, of course, and then you can add to that some raw umber or burnt sienna and some French ultramarine blue and red. And those simple colors, depending on the ratios in which you mix them, would bring together a form of gray or grayish value in them. So if you put more ultramarine blue to the mix, you will get a stronger leaning towards the blue range of the color, and a bluish gray. If you put a little more red, it will be a little reddish in content, mauvish. And if you put some more burnt sienna or raw umber into the mixture, obviously it will be a little more earthy or brownish by nature. So you come up with your individual way of doing this. I myself not an expert in terms of the Munsell color system or scale for that matter, but in my intuition, I try to learn some of the theory, but also intuitively try to apply the mixtures and apply the local colors to bring in my pieces some sort of vibrancy and life through color. Now I want to speak to you a bit about the need for proper ventilation when executing your oil paintings. Oil painting in particular, because the smell of the odors generated by the thinners, the various mediums you'll be using, and the oils themselves are very, very, very strong, and you must be careful. Even though in today's world the science has gotten it to a point that they have products like, for example, odorless thinners or odorless oil mediums, to me personally, you can still imagine that there are some chemical residues and contents that might be contained, even though to a lesser extent in terms of the ability to smell them in the pigments or in the mediums that you're working with. So even if you're linseed oils, you have to, it is best really to paint in a very highly ventilated room or area where the fumes are taken out or extracted from your room and space in the interest of your health. And also paint outdoors, like what I'm doing here is well ventilated. I can still smell some of the chemicals, but it is very well ventilated and the breeze is very strong and refreshing and nice today. So it's a good idea to consider that. It's also a good idea even to consider wearing gloves on your hands to protect you against certain chemicals in the oil. Some people are even allergic, so the oils like flake white, those they contain maybe strong elements of lead, etc. So you still have to take heed in terms of handling the medium, because you could become, or your skin could become, resistant to the medium over time. So just in terms of safety precautions, it is good to exercise this and make sure you wash up thoroughly and wash all of your brushes and everything after you finish painting each day. It could be tedious but necessary in terms of keeping your products clean and for the longevity of your products on the whole. Now let's take a look at brief materials, not too long, but I just want to introduce you to certain key materials that we use here. For example, I have here my what is called a MAL stick, MHAL stick, and this is one that I bought, but you know, for persons coming up who would not be able to find these in the store or have to order them online, you don't necessarily need to do this. What you can really do is make one yourselves. You can get a simple double stick from any hardware store in Barbados, and you can take a cloth at the top of it and strap it on, because the main function of the MAL stick is to help as a support mechanism. So whereby, for example, I want to paint an area of detail with this fine brush, for example, and I don't want it to spill over and I don't want it to muddy the oil that I'm painting on top of, I can use it as a prop here and rest my hand onto it as a support mechanism and paint this figure, for example, here in the background that I want to touch, and keep my hand stable and steady, that I won't bleed the pigment into areas that I don't want it to bleed, or it will not smudge next door. So it's a very good and handy tool to have. So that's the MAL stick. Also, it's very good to have a palette knife. Now the palette knife is very good in the sense that it can be used multiply for multiple purposes. It can be used to mix your colors together onto the palette that you're using, and it can also be used to, in terms of helping to scrape surfaces. It is quite a very handy and nifty tool to have. So it can help to even apply paint in its own when you're using something what is called impasto working, or building up your paint really thick. Like even if you use your paint directly from the tube, you can use it to apply, like how our master artist, the late Fielding Bob, would have applied some of his pigments to his pieces. He would have used a very nice crisscross pattern in terms of working the palette knife onto his paintings. Very lovely and very aesthetically pleasing to look at. So this is one key tool that you should have in your part of your toolkit and your painting arsenal as you continue to paint. Now, a rag is always handy. You could use your thinners and other things for cleaning up. Like for example, I spilled some red on my hand here, my finger. It might go elsewhere on my clothing or onto the canvas where I don't want it. So it's always good to, as you can see here, wipe with your rag as well. And that keeps everything clean and tidy. As I'm showing you just some samples of what I was using here, my colors, an assortment of colors. You know, I am not biased to any particular brand. I actually have a mixture of colors here. It is good to though get artist grade quality, professional grade colors though, rather than student grade. And I know some things are expensive, but work with what you can for now. But it's best to get artist grade and save towards that as well. Many hardware stores here and many art stores sell them as well. So it's good to get these paintings here. Today I have titanium white. I have raw umber, or I mentioned burnt sienna as well to get my gray. I have ultramarine blue, and I also have crimson red right here. So we're going to work on mixing these colors today to achieve my gray to work on the road in this scene. It is also always good to have brushes on hand, an assortment of brushes. So for broad areas, when you first start to paint, it is good to cover your canvas or your ground that you're working on with broad areas to help block in the piece really quickly and help to get a sense of where the piece is going. And then you can move on into smaller and even medium-sized brushes for the details as you get to refine your subject areas. Like if you want to put in details of leaves and enhance them, for example, and smaller areas and details that are hard to get to, like pieces of hair on the persons, or painting in shades or tires, you know, you can, or lampshades, for example, in a scene, you can use these smaller brushes to help refine your painting. So it's always good to start broad and wide, go into medium, and then fine tune and finish up your piece with smaller brushes. So that is a good thing to consider. And in terms of your palette as well, while working on the surface of your palette, it is always a good idea to put your paints to the top of the palette in a particular sequence. So, you know, you can start with your primaries or start with your various shades of blues and browns and yellows and white, so that you have a particular rhythm and order of working in terms of being disciplined on the palette. And then you leave the broader surface area or mixing area to mix your paints and your various pigments as seen here. So for example, I can show you here, I have my colors already squeezed, and then what I will do, this is my mixing area, and these are my medium cups here with the medium, with the linseed oil and with the turpentine. So turpentine to clean my brushes, and the linseed oil to I can put a mixture or ratio of that for turpentine based on something called the fat over lean method. And in discussing the fat over lean method, as simple as I can, I'll try to explain it to you, because it is always a little tricky for some people, and even sometimes for me to wrap my head around. But essentially, if you put oil, for example, straight from the tube, and it comes out in its very fatty state, with everything mixed in, and you put it straight onto the canvas in an impasto or very built up way, and then on top of that you mix and thin out your pigment of oil with a thin mixture of turpentine and also some oil, but make it very thin. And over that you lay your thin layer of oil that you have just mixed over your fat layer that you already have on the surface. What will happen is oil dries by a process called oxidization. So it does not dry by air like acrylic or watercolor. What happens is the molecular structure is so designed that it dries very slow. That's why oil is a really likable medium by many artists, because you can go back into it days later and work it. Is very malleable, and work it. It does not dry as quickly and need retardants like other mediums like acrylic, etc. So what happens in this case is that the layer underneath will be drying much slower, but the layer on top will be drying much quicker, the thinner layer. And when that happens, the layer at the bottom that is not oxidized or dried properly as yet, it will crack or split the area, the layer at the top. So that's why you see some paintings which are not well executed in terms of a conservational sense, with cracks in them, because the process has not been followed in terms of using the dry method of painting, which is the layered process of letting your piece dry. If you start with your thin layers as possible, and then to that you add more and more fat layers of mixture and chemicals into the oil painting as it progresses, finally using hardly any linseed oil or turpentine in the final layers if you must, in terms of building it up, because that top layer will need a chance to breathe. And actually it's very interesting that sometimes you have to come back maybe a year later to 6 months at least before you can varnish your oil painting, because the chemicals beneath the molecules are still moving onto the surface, even though it feels dry at the top and it is not completely dry. So you need to give oil some time to dry properly before you apply final varnishes, etc. onto the surface. So I hope I've done you some justice in terms of trying to explain that method of fat over lean process, which you must consider in terms of following the rules. Now if you're doing alla prima, it's a little different, because alla prima, Italian term meaning applied in one sitting or all at once. Some people do it with portraits, some people do it with, as they say, Phil and Bob used to do it with this palette knife and work on a scene and finish it one time in terms of working outdoors or on plein air. And what would happen is everything is done together at the same consistency more or less, and it will dry evenly and is done in one sitting. So you don't need to let a layer dry first that is thinner, then a medium layer on top, and then a final layer. You just let everything dry all at once. So now I'll get to mixing my grays and applying them onto the road here, and we will close with that. And when I come back next time, I'll look at the foliage and how to approach working on your foliage and enhancing your leaves, etc., in terms of bringing your piece to a finish. So we'll be back with the color mixing and applying it onto the road. Now, as promised, I have here mixed my red, my ultramarine blue, my raw umber, and my titanium white. And as mentioned before, I'm going to try to use my mixing area here, surface right here, to try to get a hue or a value of gray that I like. And I might vary it a bit to apply to the painting in question here, at least to the road section. and I'm going to do it now in a more impasto way in terms of working. So I will take a bit of my red, and I will take a little bit here, put it onto the mixing surface, and I'll also use the palette knife to take a little bit of my blue, and you know, you get a bit of purple doing that, and then I'll also get a bit of raw umber in itself. Just here, it comes off, and I'll apply it into the mix here, and I'll start to mix my colors as you see right here. And then once that is established, I'll now get some white, generous amount. I'll start to mix this white in, pretty much all of it, and you will see here now it's beginning to get some type of gray consistency coming about in my mixture here. So you see the whole need of mixing a generous amount with your palette knife to get a beautiful, beautiful gray. As seen here, I'll just get my thumb out of the way, and as seen here, it's turning into quite a beautiful gray, which I want to add to my road here, my street scene here by the St. Peter's Parish Church in Spicetown. So you see the nice way of a nice fluid feel, nice impasto feel done by the palette knife, and then I would apply this with a brush. So you know, so here is a nice gray mixed up from just using these 4 simple colors in a limited palette, and I can now apply my gray onto the certain areas of the street scene and use different ratios to vary the colors and make it more interesting. So let's have a look at this here. Let's put this brown here, rest this aside. I'll get my broader brush here, and I'll still use a little bit of linseed from the cup, a little ratio to make it more malleable in terms of applying to the ground or the painting surface. And I'll start here with veering my green to the front as I lay on my mixture. And I'll pick up a little bit of blue because I want to also get it a little more blue in my street scene as I vary it across here like this. It gives a nice warm finish and texture to the piece, and I'm treating it in that way in terms of looking at the element of texture, because you know in art there are roughly 8 elements you look at: line, texture, shape, form, etc., value. So kind of scrubbing it into the surface there, but also because it's the art of painting, you load up your brush with paint. It's painting, you're a painter, so you load up your brush with paint, and you it's not like scumbling or anything, it's just you just apply it into the surface, and it gives it that fresh appearance, moving it towards a finish now that you will see here. So I'll pretty much continue with these mixtures and experimenting with them, and also bear in mind the distance you want to render that is receding into the distance, so the value here will be of a different kind of value in terms of the application, and the chroma may even be a little different. So you just want to make areas very interesting and also shadowy. You think about the effect of the sun and how it was shining through that day. You could use your imagination or a reference shot. I have some reference shots as a backup that I use for my figures, but I also just wanted to show you in a brief way how to mix your gray. And again, to go over, you had a touch of red, you had some ultramarine blue, French ultramarine blue. It has some degree of transparency into that pigment. Some raw umber, or you could use burnt sienna as well, and some white, titanium white. And when you mix those together, depending on the ratio, as I said, you get a lovely gray. And of course, feel free to add what you need to add to your palette to achieve this. So it's been fun chatting with you and doing some practical stuff today. Just took a break from the theory, and I want to thank you for spending these few minutes with me. And I want to encourage you to go out and paint and mix your colors, study the theory. And it doesn't come overnight, but you have to be a work in progress. But the whole idea is to, whatever you're doing in art, make sure you do it well and do it to the best of your ability. It's a very lovely experience to do, and what a better time to do it than we are now in, unfortunately, a pandemic. But you know, this is a good way to, in terms of your mental health, pass the time, to be focused, to concentrate on an activity, doing art. is isolation, but yet not isolation, because we are actually glad as artists for the isolation and filmmakers to be able to focus and concentrate, and these things take time. So what COVID has done, in a way, if you look at the brighter side, is giving us some time to resolve and reflect and focus and build skills. So that's what I'm trying to do here, work on my skills. Besides being an administrator for the government of Barbados, I'm trying to work on my artistic side and bring a balance to my life. So this is a very good way to do this. So have a wonderful and safe Sunday, and I'll catch you next week as I look at another area to work on. Maybe I'll look at the trees next week, or look at the sky or the background, or even the figures. But I know we'll come back and decide that next week as we look at another area in terms of trying to bring this paint into a finish. It feels so sweet with the pigment going onto the canvas. So take care and bye for now. Thanks for watching, and do remember, click on the subscribe button and come here with me and spend a few wonderful moments. Peace.